All right, I think we're started. My name is Kevin Ring. I'm president of FAMM. Welcome to another edition of FAMM's Heart to Heart series. And today we're going to talk about second chances, which is a high priority at FAMM. We've recently launched a second chances agenda that is designed to address extreme lengthy sentences, usually mandatory sentences, both at the federal and state level. Today we're going to focus on the District of Columbia and their past and current efforts in that regard. A lot of people ask, why are you going after extreme sentences? Why do we need to address this? And a common refrain is that we need to address these lengthy sentences if we're going to reduce mass incarceration. And that is certainly true, but that's really only one reason. And it's a somewhat negative frame on it. Really, the positive way to look at this is that if we are going to make communities safer, we need to address second chances. If we want to keep families together, we need to provide second chances. If we want to advance racial justice, then we need to address second chances. And if we want to spend taxpayers' money more wisely on things that actually work to keep us safer, then we have to provide people an opportunity for second chances. And when we talk about second chances, our focus is not really, our goal is not letting everybody out of prison. It's really to stop throwing everyone away. And unfortunately, our sentencing laws at the federal and state level are very good at throwing people away, but it's hard. They don't do a good job of giving people a second chance. And so that's what this focuses. That's what our campaign is about. I encourage you, if you're not already following us, to text chances to 21333. That's chances to 2133. You can learn more about what we're doing at the federal and state level, including in DC, where we're supporting a second look law that we hope will be up by the end of the year. And that's going to be the topic of our discussion today. So I'm really glad to welcome Charles Allen, who's a District of Columbia council member from Ward 6, Melody Brown, who works at the Free Minds Book Club as a reentry coordinator and is an advocate and has a personal story to share, and James Zeigler, who's the executive director of the Second Look Project in DC, who I believe is representing a lot of people who are seeking a second chance. And so I want to start with you, Councilman Allen. You have a proposal now for a second look that we will, let me see. We may have to, okay, I think we're up. You have a proposal now to give people a second look at a certain age, but this has been a work in progress, and it started in 2016 with a law that first did it for youthful offenders. So can you give us a little history about DC's approach and your motivation and why you think this is important to do?
Yeah, thank you so much. And Kevin, appreciate facilitating this conversation, and thank you so much to FAMM. Just been a phenomenal partner in thinking about these issues and being a leader in this space. So my big thanks, frankly. For anybody who's not familiar with the district, it might be helpful just to very briefly just touch on what makes some of the criminal justice system within the district so unique. And that is that unlike anywhere else in the country, prosecutions in most cases are handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office. So someone who's not accountable to us, a prosecutor that's not accountable to us, and they are federal prosecutors, and they prosecute our local laws. And so that's one big problem. The second, of course, is that we have no control as the district with 702,000 taxpaying Americans. We have no ability to have control over what happens after someone is sentenced. They go off into the Federal Bureau of Prison, get scattered across the country, and disconnected from the supports and family and services that could help make sure that they do come home safe and come home successful. So we have challenges just with our overall system. But really, in 2016, the district passed and the council passed a comprehensive juvenile justice bill. And within that, one of the things we worked on was how do we address harsh, extreme sentences for kids? And what we did is we created what we call IRA 1.0, but it's the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act that allows people to petition to come back to the courts and have a judge hear their case for resentencing. It's about as simple as I can explain it. At the time, in 2016, the way it worked is for crimes they committed as children, so under the age of 18, they had served 20 years or more, and then they could petition. That passed not too much fanfare, really. A lot of folks, certainly within the criminal justice world, applauded it, but it didn't really get a whole lot of attention. Then we took the next step, which we call IRA 2.0. And what we did with that is that we lowered that down to 15 years, is really the only major change that we made. And that, again, passed not much fanfare. It really wasn't until the law that I've put forward, which is sometimes called IRA 3.0, sometimes called the Second Look Act, where we would extend the age. Now that we know so much more about emerging adults, about brain science, that we need to be able to recognize individuals when that crime is committed up through age 24. So we'd be expanding the eligibility. And that's what the Second Look Act does. It expands this opportunity for more people who are serving these extreme sentences. And again, it works pretty well. It's a petition back to the court. The judges are able to hear the case. And we've had about 50 individuals that have been able to come home successfully. I'm incredibly proud of all 50 of them. Most are employed. Not a single individual has reoffended. We're talking about success stories, folks who are leaders, who are violence interrupters, who are small business owners, who are artists, their fathers and grandfathers. They are what we knew that they would be, which are full of human potential and family members and important parts of our community that are ready to really show what capacity they have to love and to give back and to make our city a safer and more just place. And so it's been a really great success. Our Second Look Act, my commitment is to have it before the council for a vote by the end of this calendar year. And it's something that is going to be a really important next step for us to take here in the district to control the parts that we can control, where we see these just extreme sentences, especially for kids and young people.
Yeah. Well, along the lines of that, you described the process. Do people get denied? Does everybody who goes back before a judge, do they get approved or not?
That's a great question. No, there have been plenty of denials. There are individuals, the criticism I'll sometimes hear is people say, well, you're just opening up, the jailhouse gates. That's not at all what we're doing. What we're talking about is something that is trying to be rooted in fairness and justice. And the 50 individuals I've talked about, they've been able to go before a judge, make their case, and be able to demonstrate their rehabilitation, their own growth, their own redemption, their own journey, and that they've got something to contribute. We're better for having them home. There are denials, though, and I don't believe my job as a legislator is to pass judgment on the judge. I may agree with some decisions, I may disagree with some decisions they make, but the system is one that goes back before the courts, and the judge reviews and then makes a decision. There have been denials. Not everybody gets their petition granted, and in some cases, they know they'll be coming back and make another petition. But we have had some really great success stories with the approximately 50 people that have been able to have their resentencing completed.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. Don't take this as mudslinging, but you're a politician.
I'm used to it.
You run for office, and when you're addressing some of the most serious crimes that are committed, and here you are, and you're doing it. And I mean, what makes you and the council immune? What do you say to those who say, geez, we're going to be less safe. We can't let these people back out. And why aren't you, we have federal lawmakers and some state lawmakers who are afraid to let out the lowest level drug offenders, who did the smallest things, even during a pandemic. But here you are addressing some of the more serious offenses. And what's different? What do people need to know?
Well, I don't want you to think that there aren't people who are critical. Certainly have people who have been critical, but this is one of those things where the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we have 50 some odd human beings, individuals that have these wonderful success stories. It really is when I try to talk with neighbors or others who just aren't quite sure about this, and I really try to talk about the human potential. And in almost every case, if they've had an opportunity to meet one of the folks that's come home, one of their neighbors who's come home, to see the connection and the joy with their family, but to see their success and to realize their humanity, to realize that possibility, that's what really helps make a big connection. And in a moment that we're in right now, having not just in the district but nationally, having a conversation, trying to reckon with deep harm that has been caused, that we know it's disproportionate. There is structural racism that exists within this. I guarantee you, as a white man, I know very well that, if I made a mistake and I sat before a judge, I'm going to have a different experience than if a black man who did the exact same thing were sitting in front of that same judge. We know that there is racial inequity baked into this, and we see it play out. And when I talk to people around that as well, that this is about fairness and justice, there's a lot of people who get that, and more so, recently, as folks that maybe were silently thinking about this but didn't realize the moment that we're in, but really see the potential, and not just potential, but the obligation and duty we have to try to right solution.
And I think importantly, you don't see those two things as in conflict: advancing racial justice, addressing past harm, and protecting public safety.
We are safer because of those 50 folks that are home. Yeah. We are safer. These are individuals who are contributing to their community, to their families, to their neighborhoods, and to our city. We are a safer city because of the fact that they are home. And I'll argue that with everybody.
Yeah, I think that's really important. All right, I want to bring in Melody and James, and I want to just say before I do, because they're both advocates in DC, and FAMM is proud to support this effort. We're proud to support the DC effort and this approach in other states at the federal level. But it's really been folks in DC who have been leading this effort. I just want to say, because Melody works with Free Minds and James with the Second Chance, wait a minute, I'm going to screw up your name, with the Second Look Project. But I just want to give some a shout out. There's a Thrive Under 25 coalition that's made up of a bunch of groups that are supporting this legislation, including the one a couple of years ago, Justice Policy Institute, Sentencing Project, Campaign for Youth Justice, Campaign for Fair and Sentencing of Youth, and there's more. But I just want to say really a shout out to all the groups that have been on the ground pushing for this and working with the council to make this happen. And Melody, you're not only an advocate and a reentry advisor at Free Minds, but this issue has touched you personally. So I would ask if you could share a little bit about that.
The story, okay, it started in 1995. This young man was my husband. He was like a mentor for Junior. Junior looked up to my husband. Some kind of way, something went bad. An argument escalated. My husband had just lost his mom like 6 months before that. So a fight escalated. Junior came back to my home. My husband grabbed him, pulled him in the gate, hit him, and then in between that, the gun went off. At that point in time, my husband being a lot bigger than Junior, I was trying to get my husband off of him, but in the midst of that, my husband made a sound, and then I knew that my husband was shot. The bullet had hit him in the shoulder and moved to his heart and busted his heart. My children were there. At that time, they were 2. One was grade turned 4, 2 months shy of her birthday. By him being a juvenile, they some kind of way screwed up and released him again. In that situation, he tried to harm me, but I was a fighter and it didn't happen. So they re-locked him up. The judge apologized and he was sentenced to 40-some years. And during his course of being incarcerated, I had some ties with his brother that I would talk to periodically. And at that time, I had no remorse for him. As far as I was concerned, I wanted him to rot in hell. As time went on, my kids was like, we have to forgive him. My 2 girls, one being a police now and the other working for Covington and Berlin. She's an accountant. Both of my girls were adamant upon we have to forgive him. He sent us letters while being incarcerated. He sent each one of us letters. My kid's father also had 2 older kids, a son and another girl by a previous relationship. In turn, over the years, I would listened to my kids. I asked his other children how they felt. They were remorseful, so I end up being remorseful as well. At the time he went to court, I was there. I told the judge how I felt. I told her I felt as though I had forgiven him. But you can't just set him up for failure. You have to have a plan for this young man. You can't send him out to the wolves because of the fact he has to go back to the same neighborhood to end up not being employed, end up in a worse situation than, or what could get no worse than doing 23 years, but going back to jail or getting killed itself. So my main purpose was he needs a job, and he needs to be able to have a good job that he can maintain. At this point in time, he's doing very well. He has two jobs. He wants to get into his own business, and he's doing well. And I keep tabs on him.
That's amazing. Can I ask you? Well, first of all, I want to say I'm sorry for your loss. I know it's been a long time, but
yeah,
you endured unspeakable.
25 years.
Yeah. And I want to say your two daughters were young at the time, and now one's a police officer and one's an accountant at Covington.
Yes.
Congratulations on that. That's amazing.
Yes. Both of them have their masters. And my oldest daughter, she remembers her dad. She remembers so much that I am just sometimes overwhelmed as her stories, and she has to remember them because I never told her about certain situations. She remembers her dad, and that's a part of me that hangs on to it. And I'm not far from him, so I often go visit him at Mount Olive Cemetery. I'll sit there, and the workers are like, I know who she talks to because I go there very often. And I've been having a whole conversation with Jerry. And
let me ask you this: were you in touch with Junior before sentencing, and when your daughters were encouraging you to forgive? Did you reach out to him, or was he able to reach out to you?
He wrote me, and what happened was the lawyer that he got the second time, Miss Cobbs, she was the best. Matter of fact, Miss Cobbs also worked at Covington at Burling, where my daughter works. So they end up connecting. She did a little sneaky thing and end up connecting with my daughter. I gave her the number, but they end up having lunch. And my daughter called me and says, Mom, she's really nice. She's really working with Junior. And I end up talking to her. And I was asking her all these questions like a second mom. You cannot let him out here for failure. He has to be able to, do well, progress, and, get his life together and keep his life together. That was my main concern.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of times we hear that people who are victims of crime, it's not just their anger or fear that they have. They just want to make sure that nobody else suffers. And it sounds like that was your motivation. Yeah. I'm going to come back to you about that. James, I want to bring you in from Second Look Project. I see you on Twitter, and I know you're like on the front lines of representing people. And tell us what your organization is trying to do, and give us your perspective on how the DC approach is working. Oh, I think you're muted. That may be up to, oh, okay.
I think that works. Yeah, so is my audio?
Hold on, you're really soft though. I don't know why that is.
Is that any better?
No, not much.
Okay.
I don't know if that's something.
Give me just 1 second.
Okay.
I thought we were okay at the beginning.
Actually, I'll go one more time to Melody, and then I'll come back to you. Melody, I just want to ask you this question because I think victims have very different viewpoints on this. Some never recover, and they can't find it in their heart to forgive. And I don't judge anyone for that reason. I mean, what do you say to people who have a different view than you do on this? I mean, that who maybe I guess what I'm asking is like, are you Superwoman, or what is it that allowed you to find grace to say, I'm willing to let this person back in?
I'm not Superwoman. I have feelings. I have strong feelings. I deserve the opportunity. I mean, I want to say that nobody can tell you how you feel. First of all, you know how it's a saying, "Oh, I know how you feel." No, you do not know how I feel.
Yeah.
It's been 25 years, and it's not a day that goes by that I don't think about Jerry. I don't think about him not being able to see his daughter walk down the aisle. Um, it's just a feeling that you can't grip. But I have a great support team, and that's my support team are my two daughters. I can always talk to them. They're like my best friends. I'm like their best friend. I'm also their mother. I always have to remind them that I'm the mother. But support. You got to have a support team. If you don't have a support team, then you go to a support group. It's not an easy. It's not easy at all. When I see Junior, I'm positive. I have no regrets because I know in my heart that Jerry would have forgave him because Jerry would meant to him. He just was on a wrong path. He was a follower. He was not a leader. You just have to have support, and if you don't have support, then you seek support elsewhere.
Yeah. Councilman Allen, I want to ask you, where does the opposition come from? I mean, where do you hear most concerns about this proposal to give people a second chance?
Well, as I mentioned, the first two iterations of this we passed didn't have much opposition, to be honest. It was when we proposed increasing the age, and the opposition largely came from two places. One is from law enforcement leadership, and then the other piece was coming from our federal prosecutor. That's really where we heard the strongest opposition. I think that Melody. So many things Melody said is so correct. But recognizing that every victim's experience is their own. And I think having, law enforcement or a prosecutor stand up and say, I will speak for all victims, just isn't, is not accurate. It's not truthful. Now, I think we do have to make sure we are listening and respecting and hearing survivors and victims. And we've thought about how we can continue working on that within the process. But even many of our victims' rights and survivors organizations, they support the overarching work that we're doing and the goals we're trying to achieve. They, of course, want to make sure that we're not re-traumatizing a victim, or that we set up a system that respects them and make sure that their voice is heard in the process. Yeah. But that's really, I mean, it's pretty encouraging to hear that support as well for the changes we're trying to make.
Yeah, I think that sounds like an important piece. I've heard about that, the idea of re-traumatizing people when somebody gets a second chance. All right, James, let's try you again.
Okay, that should be better, I think.
It is better.
Okay.
Same question. What's your organization working on, and what's your general take on what DC is up to?
Sure. So the Second Look Project was founded earlier this year. And the goal and behind the organization was to really kind of create a dedicated institution, organization to people seeking sentence reductions in DC Superior Court, which has been primarily under the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act, which is what we've all been talking about. More recently, the council has passed a compassionate release mechanism that's modeled after the provisions of the Federal First Step Act. And so, because there are so many similarities in that process, we've factored that into what we're doing. So we do both now. And so, part of the goal in starting the Second Look Project was to kind of centralize and formalize a lot of the work that lawyers and advocates were doing on the ground. And the other part was in anticipation of the Second Look Act that Councilmember Allen talked about, that if it passes, and when we hope it will pass, will likely expand the population of people eligible for sentence reductions pretty significantly. And so the need for not just lawyers to handle these cases, though that's certainly part of it, but also for legal support and kind of peripheral support for other lawyers handling these cases who may not be specifically devoted to them is going to be pretty significant. So we're hoping to get out there and kind of get ahead of that rush, and also continue to serve the clients that are currently eligible and that currently need representation.
What?
So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, and what's been your? I mean, you've represented people. You have friends who've gone through the process. What has been the experience?
Sure. And so when IRA, and this is what we colloquially call the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act, was passed in 2016 and went into effect in 2017. And that created a population, this kind of population of people became immediately eligible. And it was an entirely new statute, certainly. And it was also an entirely new field of practice and process that attorneys in DC were, for the most part, just had no experience with. And so we were really kind of starting from scratch. And I became involved at the time. I was a member of the DC CJA panel, such as a court-appointed attorney, essentially, and was appointed to represent a couple of men in these cases, both of whom are now home and are doing the community work and the violence interruption work that Councilmember Allen talked about. And that was around the end of 2017. And I was kind of starting from square one, and a lot of other lawyers were in the same boat. We're lucky in DC that we have institutional resources like our public defender service, which is just kind of the gold standard when it comes to criminal defense practice. And they were there to really lead us a lot of the way in kind of developing a culture of best practices that has shaped what these cases have looked like over the last several years. And I, after being appointed in a couple of them, quickly figured out that this was something that I just felt a very kind of deep sense of connection to, in part because in law school I had worked on the case of a young man who was actually my age, who had been given an extreme sentence for a crime he committed when he was 16, and it was a DC sentence. And when we worked on his case in law school, there was no apparent avenue to relief for him. And that was just kind of eminently frustrating, because we had somebody who we knew had changed and grown and transformed themselves into this just really amazing person. But back then we didn't have an avenue to kind of ask that change be recognized. And so, that, along with my own experiences as a young person who made mistakes, and if not for a significant amount of privilege and luck and grace, could have found myself in the same position that many of my clients have. So it was something that drew me to it, and I was able to kind of shift my practice into that becoming the focus. And over the last few years, have now represented, I think, about 10 people who have sought relief, and not all have been granted. Like the council member said, there are certainly some that have been denied. And I think the takeaway that we've seen as a community of lawyers handling these cases is that these cases are taken very seriously by the court, by the attorneys handling them, certainly by the individuals seeking relief and their family members. A lot of times we have victims or victims' family members who are, as one would expect, kind of very deeply committed and invested in the process. And the idea that it is anything like a rubber stamp or just kind of swinging the jailhouse doors open just couldn't be further from the truth. On average, these cases take probably at least a year to litigate. There's extensive briefing, and judges, without exception, have just taken these decisions very seriously. The law was written in such a way, and I think we're lucky to have the bench that we do, such that judges understood the meaning of the law and take it seriously, and have understood that it has really been about the capacity for change and transformation, and identifying people who should have that second chance and who've shown themselves to have made that change. And so not only have they appreciated the purpose of the law, they've appreciated the gravity of these decisions for everybody involved. And they've all been just very kind of thorough and rigorously litigated and decided.
Yeah.
And on the other side, now what we've seen with now over 50 people, I think, home, and as others have noted, no recidivism, not only no reoffending, I'm relatively confident saying that there have not been any technical probation violations, and almost everyone has been on supervised probation. So it's really huge success in that respect. But what we've seen is so many families reunited, so many of these, I say guys, it has been all men that have been released so far, that have come home and are contributing to their community in so many different ways, making use of their experience, and just being really dedicated in their efforts to, I think, give back to a community that many of them feel like they took pretty significantly from.
Yeah.
And so we have, the last thing I would add is that, we've talked about, what the opposition has been and how we've gotten that kind of buy-in from the public and the community. And I think certainly as the law has progressed, so much of it has come from the men who've come home and who have shown people in a very kind of visceral and clear way that people do change, and that these changes are sincere and meaningful. And that kind of proof, I think, is what really convinces people that these are not people who need to stay locked up.
Yeah, no, well said. You mentioned the DC Public Defenders. Want to give them a shout out. I know they've been very instrumental in this. And Tyrone Walker, who's one of the recipients and has been on with us a couple times, and now is an incredible advocate at Justice Policy Institute. Perfect example of second chances. Melody, we got some questions starting to come in, and I saw that you answered it, but I'm going to have you answer it for everybody, which is, how has forgiving Junior changed your family, and has it changed you, and what has that process been like?
It has made me stronger. Jerry was like my enabler, because he was like, you have a wife, you're supposed to take care of your wife. He gave me everything in the world. He was just my everything. And by him passing, it's made me a stronger person. It's made my kids want to be in law enforcement. As I said, my oldest daughter is a police officer. It's oh God. As me being an only child, I was a spoiled brat anyway. So but it's changed me. And as I said, when I see Junior, I'm very forgiving. I just want the best for him, but it's made me a better person.
Let me ask you this. I can't even not ask this, because we're going through this moment in this country. You have a daughter who's a police officer, so she sees.
Oh, wow. We would be on here all day long, because she had stories of how we're trained, but this is so true. We are getting all these young guys. As to when I was growing up, even when I got older and moved from home, we all knew our police officers. We knew the police officer is going to arrest you. We know the police officer is going to tell you just go home. We knew the police officers. Now we get all these new polices. They're from all types of all over the world. They come into these rural areas. They're scared. They just don't know what's going on, and it's just a chaos. My daughter always says about your threat level. You don't know how far a person's threat level is. It could be from here to the end of your hand. That's their threat level, and they're just scared. You're trained not to shoot a person in the back. Oh, my daughter, I love her stories. She has her views, and I just tell her, sometimes keep your views to yourself. But so far, so good. I worry about her. I tell her,
I believe that.
Don't be the first responder to a shooting or I know I shouldn't tell her that, but she's my child. So, you
Yeah.
know, and she's my daughter, and she's my oldest daughter. And I call her, we FaceTime. There she is now. And we stay. She tells me what areas she's on. If I look her up, I can't see your location. Where are you? And stuff like that. So yes, I worry about her, but so far so good.
Life is complicated.
Yes, it's complicated, and God above.
Councilman Allen, we got a question. You know, we're supportive of your effort, and somebody asked, as advocates and family members, what can we do to keep this issue and this reform as a priority, especially given how complex the world is now? And I assume what people mean is it's so hard to keep attention on everything with the election, with the pandemic. It's just, you know, oxygen is short for different issues. What can we do to support your efforts to get this done this year?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like we have just how many different crises do we want to layer on top of one another and just see what we can handle. So I know a lot of people we're all stretched thin. You know, I think for the district, for our law here in DC, and to make sure it's clear, you know, our law would obviously be for DC code offenses, not federal offenses. But the way that we need help is to continue to make sure that we are talking to our elected officials to give them the courage to take this step. You know, it's been interesting as we continue to move this law forward. You know, the first two iterations, they passed, and again, as I mentioned, not a whole lot of fanfare. It really wasn't until the Second Look Act that there was starting to be a little criticism of folks that really more from a place of just kind of being scared. But it's been interesting. Some people have said all of a sudden, well, maybe we should just exempt all violent crimes. Like I'm okay with resentencing, but nothing violent. And first, we already passed two versions of this that obviously don't have exemptions for anything. And the reality is you're likely not sentenced for over 20 years in Federal Bureau of Prisons, you know, for stealing a pack of chewing gum. Like it's likely going to be a serious mistake. A harm was caused that leads to a very significant sentence. And so if we were to just exempt serious offenses, we would be, we wouldn't really be able to impact that many people, because that's where we see so many of the extreme sentences. But again, we'd be shutting the door on so many people that did make a mistake, but when they were young, when they were a kid. And they can prove and show rehabilitation, and they can show that resilience, they can show that redemption, they can show the opportunities to really, as I heard a good friend of mine say, to be able to heal the harm that they caused. And there's nothing more redemptive, I think, than that, is somebody who wants to actively seek to heal harm. And that's just a fundamental tenet of restorative justice and the work that we do. So I think continuing to advocate to neighbors, to friends, but also to your elected officials, that to make sure they've got the courage not to try to water it down, not to try to exclude people, but to recognize that there is human potential in all of us, and that we have built a system, as you heard James talk about, that courts take this very seriously. They're very thorough, and it's a high bar to be able to have that resentencing, but this is the right thing to do. And we just want to make sure that you advocate to your elected officials and make sure that they've got the courage and the backbone, and that they know that you've got their back to be able to take the right step.
Yeah. Do you sense any backtracking, or do you think, I mean, are people in a good place?
I think most people are in a very good place, actually. I think, especially with the experiences we've now had, where we can show, you know, so many just wonderful success stories. James, you know, talked about what that is. Recently, we're in the middle of an election here in DC, and we have a council member, a new council member, is going to be elected. And one of the questions that the Washington Post asked, they did their candidate questionnaires, was, do you support the Second Look Act? And every single candidate, there were 24 of them running for the seat, every single one of them said yes. There's no way they would have answered that question a couple of years ago the same way. Right. We have come a long way in understanding our system and what needs to change. So the fact that you have every candidate that said yes, certainly gives me a lot of confidence that we are moving in the right direction. But it's also a testament to the work of so many amazing organizations that have continued talking about and educating and advocating for this very necessary change.
Yeah, Melody, I want to ask you, because I mean, I guess this could be relative to your personal experience, but also maybe just the work you do now as a reentry advocate. For some people, the line between violence and nonviolence is just determinative. They think, you know, a nonviolent offender, sure, I'll give that person a second or third chance no matter what they do. But somebody who commits violence, you know, they forfeited any right to be back in society. So both, just as somebody who did this personally, how would you address people who say, because I think your point was Junior had changed, he wasn't the same person. But there's others who look at that and say, I don't care if he changed, he did that, and for that reason alone, he should, you know, rot in hell, as you had said. How do people go about changing their thinking on that?
You cannot change, because some people are just firm at what they believe in.
Yeah.
I'm not being a hypocrite when I say this, because like I see these shows where people are killing their kids and stuff like that. I think everybody deserves a second look, but everybody does not deserve a second chance.
Right.
Now, so you would say, well, what makes Junior different? It's a big wide range. It all depends on the case of it. I'm not a lawyer or a judge, but I do think everybody that's between these ages, I go with the new law. I think everybody does deserve a second look. I know Junior has changed. I feel it in my soul, because being in that courtroom, let me put it like this. If my kids had said they didn't forgive him, maybe this might end it different. But being as though I went to court, I heard him, I looked at him in his eye, I feel as though he's changed. Every case is different.
Yeah.
I feel confident about, and I stand firm in what I believe in. Everybody might not be in a person's personal life as far as their progress, making sure he goes to the probation office. I do all my own little homework to make sure that he's on track. And I do, because I just don't want to set him up. I just don't want him to lose his job. If he's there some kind of way, I will try to help him. I just invested so much in this, and not to let jury down. In a way, it might sound crazy, but I know jury would have forgave him. So I'm gonna do all I can to make sure he's on the right path. And with that being said, you just have to go with your gut. You can't change everybody, but you can at least give them the information to try to change. And I'm glad my kids forgave him. I'm glad I forgave him, and I just wish the best for him. And anybody else is going through this, I would say to them, give it a chance. At least hear it out. At least hear it out to the end.
Good. Councilmember, did you want to say?
I just wanted to just really echo and lift up one of the things that Melody is talking about, which is trying to build out the systems that help people succeed when they do come home. Because, you know, as a legislator, I always try to think about not legislating in a vacuum, and recognizing that the work that we're doing to help people come home, then that means we also have to do our job to help set them up for success. That means, you know, we created just recently like a peer navigator. You know, one of the things I learned by talking to some of the first men who came home was how lonely it was and how hard it was that they didn't have a support system. And so we created a peer navigator system to help connect people when they came home. We're working on creating housing. You know, so part of reentry, you've got to get people into stable housing. You've got to get people hooked up into jobs and opportunities. Melody is she's spot on what she talks about. And this would circle back to the question earlier about what can people do to advocate for success. In addition to advocating for, you know, this type of legislation, I would strongly encourage people to help make sure that their governments, whether that be here in DC or anywhere else, are thinking through the types of things to help people succeed. That's going to be housing and jobs and those support systems. I can't overstate how important that is to make sure that we are helping set people up for success.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, Matthew Charles, who works with FAMM, was the first beneficiary of the First Step Act, went to as a guest of President Trump, and then couldn't get housing in his hometown of Nashville, and because of his record. And so if we want people to succeed, you're right, we have to continue. James, I just want to add you to jump in on any point that I've raised, including this violence versus nonviolent distinction, and just how we view people who have broken the law differently based on their type of offense, and whether that makes sense.
I think especially when we're talking about the range of eligible people that we have under our current law, which is, currently people who are actually children when their original offense was committed, but even under the Second Look Act, we're talking about people who were developmentally not yet mature. And that's one of the kind of primary rationales behind the law, is that because people developmentally don't reach maturity until at least around age 25, which means that in terms of impulse control and decision making and their vulnerability to negative environmental influences and peer pressure and things like that, that they're not actually reaching a kind of more fixed state until that later age. And so I think that's why it's important, and why the language we use matters when we talk about, people who've committed violent offenses versus violent offenders, because violence is not an immutable or permanent trait. And especially, this is true of people at any age, but especially when you're talking about young people who have so much more growth and development to go, someone who commits a violent act when they're 16 or 17 or 21 or 22 will be a radically different person by the time they're 30 or 40 or 50. And it doesn't make sense kind of scientifically or logically to attach that violent label to someone based on something they did way back when. And so I think that's why so much of this process is important, because it really is about who is this person now. And we look at the original offense, and the court looks at the original offense, and it doesn't discount that, but the real focus of the inquiry is who is this person now. And I think that's why it's important to make that distinction between people who have committed violence and violent people, because they're often not the same. Yeah,
no doubt about that. I mean, we have on our board at FAMM Sean Hopwood, who committed multiple armed bank robberies and now is a Georgetown law professor. And somebody like Sean can seem like a unicorn, like so different, and yet the more people you meet, you end up meeting a lot of people like him. And I also think, I think there's another place where race comes into it. Sean was in Nebraska, and, we might dismiss him as just an immature punk who decided to do something stupid. Whereas if he had been in the district, we might have a different view of them acting out at a young age and think that that's something that marks them for life. But I do think that distinction is one where it's not to say that some violent crimes are not more serious. But that line is not as clear as we make it. And a lot of times I think the violent crimes we see are heat of passion, as you said, poor impulse control, slights, sort of honor crimes that really are, people look at and they think it just doesn't make a lot of sense. That person clearly wasn't thinking. It's not as if they were some evil genius. They just weren't thinking about what they're doing. I want to ask you each.
Yeah, a little more thing about that, Kevin, especially here in the district, and we're talking about the population of people who committed this very serious crimes when they were young. I would say without exception, you have people who were exposed to pretty significant trauma and deprivation and environmental factors in their youth that precipitated their commission of these crimes. And so, not only do people change from being someone who may have committed a violent act to someone who's not, but when you look at the population who's most affected by crime, both in terms of the people who commit crimes and people who are victimized by crimes in the district, there's an almost entire overlap there.
Yeah.
You know, none of the people we've seen who've become eligible under our law grew up in the privileged or affluent parts of this city. And not only are they people who almost universally came from varying degrees of poverty and deprivation and were exposed to, you know, some significant amount of trauma in their childhood, especially with the group we're still dealing with and have seen come home so far, is that these are people who came of age, who were kids in the 1980s and early 90s in DC. And that was a period that has just had such a kind of lingering and indelible effect on DC. We were the murder capital for a period of years. We were just kind of completely waylaid by the crack crisis. And, you know, so we're really talking about a group of people who were kids in just one of the most difficult and traumatizing and challenging periods in our city's history. So not only are these people who have changed and are no longer violent, but it's really important when we talk about our client population, you know, these guys who are coming home, is that even back during the time when they committed violence, these were children and young people who were really placed in impossible conditions and impossible situations. And it's that they committed the harms they did is certainly not to be excused, but it's hard to understand it without that context, I think.
Yeah, no, well said. I want to mention Second Look Project are you still looking for attorneys at this point, or?
So we are. We're actually lucky to be receive funding from the district's Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants, which has allowed us to hire 2 staff attorneys, and we're still accepting applications for staff attorneys. So if anyone's interested, they can visit our website, which is secondlookdc.org, and the job listing is available on there. And yeah, so we are still looking to expand our team.
Great. I want to give Melody and Councilman Allen a chance for any final things. I'll start with you, Melody, and then I'll close with the councilman. Any last thoughts you want to share, that questions I didn't ask, or things that people should know, and from your own experience or the work you're doing now?
From the work I'm doing now, I'm working for a beautiful, I just love Free Minds. It's a nonprofit organization. And the issue that we're having is these guys, when they come home, they have no place to stay. We are in desperate need of finding them places to stay, affordable housing. And it's like pulling teeth, because a lot of them don't want to go back to the neighborhood they've come from, because that's going to result in what? More violence, or they can't go back for whatever reasons or another. So our issue is for them to get somewhere that they feel safe and stuff like that. But I love the organization. We do so much, but that is that's problems that we have, our barriers.
Yeah, tell people how they can get in touch with you all.
Yes.
Oh, how can people reach to you guys?
Free Minds bookclub.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody FAM's a big fan of Free Minds. So.
We're on 1816 12th Street, but
right.
to have an appointment because of the COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story and again with us, and we appreciate that. And Councilman Allen, just any last thoughts? I want to say again, thank you for what you're doing. We're grateful to be in a position to support you. We hope something gets done. I think this can be a model for the country. And what else should we know?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I mean, let me reciprocate that with my thanks. I mean, it's, the work and support, Kevin, that you and FAMM have provided has just been wonderful, thoughtful type of leadership. And it's really, I benefit greatly from the type of local leadership that takes place with, with our other 2 panelists, like with Melody and James and so many others. It's the the hard work, the voices and leadership they provide is just something that can't be overstated. It's what allows us to be able to keep moving forward and making progress. I think for folks that have been watching and listening and learning, I hope that one of the main takeaways here is that when we're talking about trying to find ways to make sentencing reform, to look at extreme sentencing and trying to make changes through that second look is, again, it's certainly recognizing on the individual level that every person has the capacity for change. Every person has the capacity for redemption. Every person has that within them, and having sound policy that recognizes that is simply just making sure we don't throw people away. That we recognize that you very well made a mistake. We all have made mistakes, and what is the right way, and how do we define what accountability really means? But I think most importantly is if our shared goal is that we want a safe and just city, or wherever anybody of your viewers are, a safe and just community, this is the type of policy that achieves that. This is the type of law and reform that achieves that, because it is making us a more just place to live. It is making a more just system for all of our neighbors, but it fundamentally makes us a safer place. These are, this type of rigor to go through for a resentencing, really shows the individuals that deeply care and love their community and their neighborhood, and they want to heal that harm, and they are giving back to our city every single day. They're making it a safer place. They are actively working to make this a great place, and because they love this place. This is where their family is. It's where where they are rooted, and they care deeply about it. So I think this is the type of policy that really does help achieve goals that I hope everybody shares, which is that we want to be a safe and just place. And I have confidence that we're going to get this law passed. I have confidence that we're going to make sure we have all the systems in place that continue to make it be successful. And have been grateful for the hard work that has enabled us to be able to get to this place.
Well, thank you. I just want to let you know that this is a test run for you, because after this election, if the Democrats take control and make DC a state, you're going to have to sponsor this at the federal level.
I guess we'll announce the Senate run as soon as we can, and then take that our platform. You're right, but yeah, DC statehood, everybody. We want to make sure you know that.
I was going to let you put a plug in for that.
I appreciate it.
Thanks to Melody, Charles Allen, and to James Zeigler. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, everybody.